Hello, my name is Gary Mansfield, and this is the Ministry of Arts podcast, where each week I'll be speaking to a different artist. Now let's begin by bagging these bongos.
Yeah, right. Crazy.
Hello and welcome to episode 216. I'm not sure of the exact date. I think it was around August time I started this podcast, but it's 5 years this year. I thought I would have been snapped up by Sky Arts as a presenter long before now. At the end of this episode, there will be a little bit of information telling you how you can support the podcast via our Patreon page. You can do so for less than the price of a cup of coffee per month. It all helps to keep the content flowing. But if you're unable, that's absolutely fine. This content is free for everyone. Well, in this episode, I'm speaking to sculptor Holly Stevenson. I've not met Holly before, although we had chatted on the socials. And I should mention a big thank you to Tanny Burns for the introduction. If you know Holly's work, then you'll be aware that not only is her work amazing visually, but the concept is absolutely fascinating. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers here, so we'll go straight into the conversation, so then she can tell you for herself. So please, come and join me in conversation with Holly Stevenson.
Being an artist, I think, is really strange because it's such a solitary occupation generally, but yet it's an occupation that then craves attention. So it's like that paradox, isn't it? It's like, look at me, look at me, look at me, but, well, look at my work, which is me, but then don't look at me, leave me alone. And so I think the way that being in an artist's sort of like community like Thameside rubs off is the fact that you don't feel like a weirdo. You know you're not alone. You know there's loads of other
weirdos.
Weirdos going to work in the freezing cold in 5 layers of clothing and a woolly hat and turning on a very expensive ceramic heater or oil-filled radiator to make something that realistically nobody needs or wants. There's a big cuddle in that.
And getting back to you personally, how would you describe what you do to someone that wouldn't know your work?
I make ceramic sculpture. Now, this is the weirdy bit. So I make ceramic sculpture that is, what can I say? So my work is described as idiosyncratic. Basically, I make ceramic sculpture about how I feel about life. And I've got this ongoing project called in Sigmund Freud's Ashtray.
Brilliant.
I'm really into psychoanalysis, and I go and see an analyst every week. And I have sort of built this into my practice in the sense that I've taken Sigmund Freud's favorite ashtray, which you can still find on his desk. It's like this really beautiful oval dish with a cigar left in it. So you've got two very phallic forms. You've got an oval shape, which looks like a vagina, basically. And then you've got a cigar that looks like a penis. And I've taken these two forms and I've built them into my practice in the sense that in every sculpture I make, I build the oval and the cylinder into the figures. And I've taken it sort of like a metaphor, really. So to talk about how I feel about things. It's a place to put things, this ashtray for me. So if you look at the bottom of my figures, they're always standing on this oval shape that I've taken. And invariably there's some kind of curling sort of snake-like smoky movement or object within the work. And I guess the most well-known one is the actual replication of the form of the ashtray with the actual form of the cigar, and then all these kind of like wormy faces crawling out of it. And so I've taken this sort of like historical object and I've used it as a metaphor really for what I'm thinking about and how I feel about life.
Was it actually seeing it that give you that light bulb moment, or was it the story of it and then you went to seek the actual physical object?
Oh my God, that is such a good question. So it's both. Like, so I became obsessed with the Freud house. So I actually volunteered in the Freud house just so I could go there.
Brilliant.
And they were so generous because they're Freudians, so they're used to people.
Yeah, yeah.
They're very accepting people. And I would go there like every week pretending to be a volunteer. But meanwhile, like I was analysing the whole house, all the objects, trying to really get into what was this thing, you know, what was psychoanalysis. And the study, have you been there?
I have, but many years ago. I don't know if it's changed any.
No, of course not. It's never going to change. It's quite daunting, isn't it? Because it's A, of another world, and B, it's of another class. And it's this luxurious kind of environment with all these really kind of like intellectual objects and things. They could just be in the British Museum, really, but it's the fact that Freud had collected them all. And the thing I identified most with was the ashtray with the fag in. It was that simple. And I just thought, oh, this is where I'm at. And then when I saw that it was a jade dish and it was from Russia, so my grandmother was a Russian refugee, something unconsciously or semi-consciously in my head just clicked. And that was the thing that I could pull from that situation to identify my allegiance with the talking cure, as it were.
I didn't see that item when I was there, and I was there 20 years ago. So
I assure you it was there.
No doubt. And funnily enough, when I went there, it wasn't to see the house. Tim Noble and Sue Webster were having an exhibition in there.
Yeah.
And that's what I went to see, was the exhibition in that house. So we had a tour of the house because the work was scattered all around. So I don't remember that object, but did he ever make reference to the ashtray and, was it cigar or cigarette, did you say?
Well, he was a massive smoker. He eventually he had a prosthetic jaw put in due to cancer of the jaw.
Oh, wow, okay.
And he would have, towards the end of his life, he had his mouth propped open with a clothes peg so he could actually smoke cigars. And he said that cigars were his favorite hobby even before collecting antiquities.
Wow.
And so Freud and smoking, it's brilliant, isn't it? This huge figure who brought into our kind of lexicon, you know, oral fixation, all these Freudian words that we use on the daily. He basically was a massive nicotine addict. And he had 4 ashtrays, but this was the one that was on his desk that he used every day. And so it's still there with the cigar, one of his last cigars left in it.
And did he ever make reference to that cigar and the ashtray as you are, or is that reference wholly yours?
Freud spoke a lot about smoking. He also wrote a monograph. He also wrote a lot about cocaine. I mean, these were things that he dealt with, like, but not in the way that I'm referencing it. He didn't really like contemporary artists, although the Freud Museum is a pilgrimage for contemporary artists. And I don't know if you remember the amazing installation with the mirror.
I don't.
Oh, it was just the best. This is really bad. I've forgotten the artist. I think it's Hirschhorn. He just mirrored the whole ceiling. I mean, there's been, you know, like you were saying that Tim and Sue were there. They've had amazing shows, like Sophie Cowell laid her wedding dress on the couch. I mean, it is like I said, a pilgrim site for artists. But Freud wasn't very keen on contemporary artists. So I don't really think he would have liked my work that much. I mean, he avoided meeting Salvador Dali for years. And then when eventually he did meet him, he called him a Spanish madman.
If the cap fits, let's wear it, eh?
Yeah. But he did acknowledge he could paint.
Yeah. And
there is a brilliant drawing of Freud in the house that Dali did with his head made up of snails.
Oh, super.
So, you know, I mean... Yeah, but he didn't think much of the surrealists' approach to psychoanalysis.
And you personally, about your creative journey, did you have creativity in the home growing up?
Well, depends what you call creativity. But did I have artist parents? No, absolutely not. I mean, I was born on a housing estate in King's Lynn. And I remember the first time I saw something colourful. Basically, I got picked up from nursery by my friend's grandmother, and she couldn't speak English. She was Indian, and she took us home and she gave us rice and yogurt. And there was this picture of Ganesh on the wall, and I must have been about 3.5. And I was like, holy shit, there is something more to life than mashed potato and kind of, you know, some cheap reprint. My parents went to teacher training college. So it wasn't that they were uneducated, and it wasn't that they didn't have an idea where the Tate Modern was. And also they were part of that London overspill. So like one of my great grandfathers was the Lord Mayor of Hackney. My mum was born in Margate. And so my dad was born in Greater London. So they were the kids that had done good. They'd got into teacher training college. So they had these ideas, but no, there wasn't really art in my house. No, my mum made Play-Doh.
That'll do. You questioned the creativity at the start of that question.
Yeah.
What creativity was in the home?
Oh, I really believe that creativity comes in so many forms. So my father was really musical, and he got a scholarship to one of the, I can't remember, one of those grammar schools in like the Windsor area. In fact, he actually got a choral scholarship to Eton. Wow. My grandfather dug the roads and drove a 3-wheeler van and said he wasn't going to go to school with a load of puffs. So my life would have been really different.
At least he wasn't held back.
Imagine. Just like, but, you know, but actually from that kind of perspective, if you think about it, it's not about sexuality, it's about class.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you find with a lot of the working class, we're our own worst enemy, because we think that going beyond a certain level is beyond us.
It's really complicated because I feel really transient. And I think even the art world's really curious place. There are so many glass ceilings in the art world. Yeah, there are so many kind of amazing portholes. It's a really generous place in many ways, where all kinds of different people rub shoulders with each other all the time. I mean, I've experienced some incredible generosity from people.
No, likewise. So, every now and then when I do or say something, in my head I'll be going, you know, don't get above your station. The other side of me quickly turns up and says, no, you know, any station's yours. Yeah,
it's true. Like the art world's funny, isn't it? I really love what Grayson Perry said. He said, oh, you know, I'm signed up to the Church of Art. And I think the art world is a bit of a church, because you do have to take practices seriously. You know, it's like, you know, when you turn up, I don't know, to a performance and someone's ripping tape off their genitals, you don't laugh. Okay, right, fine. You know, so there is a kind of a binding code of respect, if you want. And but I think once you're signed up to that, yeah, sure, you can laugh afterwards, but yeah, it's got its moments. And funnily enough, I've got a show opening in Rome, and I went to work in a ceramic factory, but at night I ended up staying in a convent. Wow. And I got talking to these nuns, and it was quite amusing. And, you know, and it was Sunday, and I really thought, oh, you know, and they'd got their chapel in the convent. And I said to them, I said, look, sisters, I am actually signed up to the Church of Art. This is just how it is with me. And after that, they were like, oh, all right then. And they were so sweet to me, you know, they just expected no more.
Superb. When was the point you remember that you wanted to become an artist?
Well, my mother says that I didn't really do anything after nursery school, and that all I spent my time was cutting, sticking and gluing. And it wasn't that I was academically incapable, but some things happened in my family life. So imagine I went to 5 different secondary schools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's hardcore.
Well, each year or?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. So
Was
by
that
the
through
time
family moving or through you being a pain in the arse and getting kicked
it
out?
was my mother.
Okay.
And after that happened to me, so by the time I went to the 5th secondary school, well, partly though, by the time I'd gone to the 4th, I was a pain in the arse. And by the time I'd gone to the 5th, I just didn't go. So I went to work. So I got, this will make you laugh actually. I decided to get a job. I was going to be 16 very, very shortly. So I was going to get a job and that was it. And then I did leave home. But what I did was I went round applying, you can imagine. So I got a job in a fruit and veg shop. I got a job in a cafe, but then I got a job on a market stall, but it wasn't any old market stall. They were milliners and so I got trained to make hats properly, like in Luton, in the market stores in Cambridge, but I went to the factories in Luton.
A home of milliners.
So like they made hats for Liberty, they worked with Philip Treacy, I met Isabella Blow. So it was a whole different scene. Although, yes, I had to spend a lot of my time standing on a market stall. That was an education in itself. I met people. And then, so I was always making. I knew how to do certain things, though I didn't see it as art in any shape or form. Then I thought, I can't stand on a market stall forever. I was really tough then, like 5 years. I'd seen it all, I'd done it all. And so I kind of thought, right, I'm going to go back to so I went to adult education class. Well, I met like loads of squaddies' wives, loads of immigrants. It was a thing. I had this art history teacher and she was a Chilean refugee. And that chimed with me. It was somebody I could understand. I knew that kind of traumatic background. I could relate to what she was doing. So I got into Cambridge and I got into Glasgow and I can't remember where else I got. But in my infinite wisdom, I went to Glasgow and I got this really academic degree. Like we used to have this guy called Professor Tate who used to talk about Palladio and it's Palladio and his mansions. I had this really hardcore training. And
in what degree was that, Holly? Sorry, was that fine art?
Art history.
Okay, sorry.
No, so yeah, the history of art. So after that, what do? You go to work in Christie's or you go to work in a museum or you go to, I went to work in cinema. I got a job as an assistant in Italy, working in cinema, which was much more me, like making sets. So like I'd have my lunch on the set of Gangs of New York, and sort of wander around. And so that was another phase in my life. Then some things happened and then I had my son Hector and I'd given birth and they were like, on the birth certificate, they were like, you had to write your occupation. And so my husband was already a photographer. Well, my partner at that point was already a photographer. He wrote photographer. I wrote artist. Okay, fine. I'm an artist. And then my life sort of rumbled on and I got into Chelsea Art College. I wanted to do the BA, but then because I'd already got this art history degree, it was equivalent and they wanted something ridiculous, equivalent learning fees. It would have cost, I don't know, 9, 10, whatever. So they looked at my portfolio and they said, I think you can do the masters. So the masters, they looked at my portfolio and I got onto the masters. And then as much as I fought with them at art school, they were so good to me. I got a Stanley Picker bursary. I got an artist, some American collectors bursary. So I had then I got a formal art education and that's the way I did it. It's not easy in a system like Chelsea to give different people chances. And, like I was living in a council flat in Lewisham. Meanwhile, on the MA, we had a guy from Korea whose butler came in and hung his show. That's how London works. It takes sorts. The fine art course at Chelsea is split into 2 parts. You do the PG DIP and then you go to do the masters. You do it in a year. So most other places had 2 years at that point, but Chelsea split it up. And it took me 3 years because I didn't have the money to continue to the MA. And so I reapplied and, I was considered. And you're so right. When you're considered, then doubts do disappear because it's not that money is a simple sign of, validation. It's more that it's really difficult to make things without it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I stopped my MA because,
Did you?
yeah, my partner, similar to you, I'd started it. I was about maybe 6 weeks in, and my partner fell pregnant, and then that was it. It was like, I can't be a student with a family because it's just fucking selfish.
Well, it's really hard, and it's
And
kind
we
of
had fuck
an
all.
art college demands that you're there. That is the point about art college. It's about being with other artists and being part of it. And in fact, on my MA, I was hated by 50% of the course because it was like this classic bun fight. This is Chelsea all over. You turn up, there you've got all these international people. Half the room doesn't speak proper English. Everyone's trying to get to know each other, and you know. And then you're supposed to, within that, the way they make you bond, it's like some crazy psychological experiment, is that you're all supposed to sort out your own studio spaces. And I had a child to pick up, so I just dumped my stuff in the best corner I could find. I'm here for the next year. Sorry, I've got to leave. And what was brilliant about this was I spent a year in a room with all Asian students from Korea and China because they just followed suit. They were like, oh, that's the thing to do. We'll follow her.
Brilliant.
Great. And it was brilliant. Like, they taught me about paper, drawing. I learned a whole set of different manners. I also watched somebody very famous who was up for a Turner Prize make somebody Chinese who'd been in a boarding school in England from the age of 4 cry. I saw the best and the worst side of art college in that room. You know, she'd done this series of paintings, and he just looked at her and said, you need to do a lot better in life if you're going to make it anywhere, kind of thing. It was one of those talks. So, I mean, who knows? It might have done us some good.
I was going to say, how wrong is that? You know,
I don't know.
The person crying, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that art, so wasn't there? No, but that's really interesting, because I go to my studio, and I don't want to sound glib, especially talking to you, but sometimes I feel like I'm entering a cell. And that's why I really liked staying with the nuns in the evening and working in the ceramic factory by day, because having some kind of barrier, some kind of being confined somehow, having it like a specific place that matches your head in which to make art is really useful. And as horrible as it was, I'm sure prison, from that point of view, you know, you had to get down to making the work. There was nothing else to do. And that is like having an art studio. You can't have distractions like sofas and TVs and, you know, you'd never have one of those in an art studio. Why? It's just like, go in, do the work, focus.
But also what I had, Holly, I had no distractions of family and obligations. I didn't have to go to earn money to get my shopping because I had 3 shit meals a day given to me. You know, so I could.
Oh, it sounds really good. Like, I'm paired with Louise Bourgeois on this giant show at the minute, Body Poetics. And as soon as her husband died, she was, you know, heartbroken. She chucked out the kitchen. She turned the whole house into her studio. Brilliant. And if you've ever seen videos of her, that is it. Like, she, you know, I'd do the same. In fact, my son's just gone back to uni, and the house is full of ready-made soup, because cooking and cleaning and doing those things is actually very distracting.
How did clay come into your world?
It's been a long struggle with clay. So I've always really liked that kind of material since a kid, like the Play-Doh. And then, I mean, literally since Play-Doh. And then at Chelsea, how did it come into my world professionally? At Chelsea, I went to ask about using clay, and I got, the guy there's lovely, but I clearly got him on the wrong day. And Grayson Perry was just getting to be really mega famous. And he went, I'm not going to teach you how to make a pot. And I used to be very bad at asking for what I wanted. Yeah. And I just was like, oh, I didn't even want to make a pot. Okay, I'll use them. So I left, and I carried on using plasticine and making films and collaging and sticking and making using paper clay and papier mâché and all of that stuff. Right. And then I'd finished my master's and I was like cutting, gluing and sticking in this shared studio. I'd always kept shared studio space, partly because my house has always been so small, and partly because it was that one space that I had. Anyway, so I was there with my millions of magazines doing what I was doing. And then I saw my friend at the school gates, and she's amazing. She's a ceramicist from the Royal College, and she taught in the local adult education. I was like, oh, how's it going? Yeah, it's fine. Oh, I'm doing this. Yeah, I'm a part of this group show that nobody will ever see. And oh, yeah. And she said, oh, you should come to my clay class. So I was like, okay, I'll come to your clay class. The minute I got in that clay class, that was it.
Grown-up plasticine, right?
Yeah, building candlesticks, building this, building that, building the other, building. Then I took over the dining table, building. And then I said I could do a show at the old, it was called Griffin Space. My friend Karen David gave me a show and I said, yeah, I can. Oh, yeah. And then I supplied these clay sculptures that I'd had to mend with milliput. And it just kept going and going. But it's just such a lovely tactile material. I mean, I do other things. Like I made a film recently about clay, and but there's something magical about clay in the sense it's so bodily and it's so breakable and it's so fragile, yet it's so resilient, and yet it's also something that we all know. Like, so when it's so funny, what curators always really worry whenever they do an exhibition with you, people keep touching the work. Oh yeah, of course they do, because they hold a mug every day, or a plate. It's no different. It's ceramic, and I kind of quite like that, really.
Well, I just love the fact that we might be watching telly and they'll dig up a 2,500-year-old clay pot.
Yeah.
And it's no fucking different to what you made yesterday.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? It blows my mind.
Where would we be though without the pot? That's exactly. The vessel. I mean, in every sense, like it's such a metaphor, isn't it? A vessel for from being female, even being male, we're kind of vessels in a sense. And where would we be? What would we gather our stuff in? How would we eat?
Exactly. So it was at that point when you joined that class and you saw what your possibilities were in that material that you wanted to be. It was
at that point where I really saw how the whole process, because the kiln was also part of that classroom, the drying room, the whole setup. I was like, okay, this is how it works from A to B. And then I realized, right, because that's the other thing, isn't it? It's about making artwork is about control over process. And even artists that have huge budgets, okay, they might get things fabricated, but they really generally understand those processes. And when they don't, you can see there's a loss of control and it becomes less interesting. Yeah. And I think that there's something in that. So it was at that point in that adult education class where I could see that process, and I knew that if I could get that process for myself, that I could then work with those limitations. But it was also in that class when I made my first ashtray, and I was like, yes, this is what I want to work with. Because it's like, anyway, you have to start, don't you, with the basics. I was like, well, I knew I wanted to build enormous form, but it wasn't going to work in the way that I wanted to do it. So I worked out that I could use those forms with like the nuts and bolts and the, and the colander, that they had real meaning for me, and I could use those forms and then I could build on them and
got to make a big ashtray.
So, yeah, exactly. So I've kept that object. I really love that object.
It's beautiful how your first eureka moment is the one that you're in all this time later.
Yeah,
the
like
ashtray.
I just stick to it. Yeah, I know. And funnily enough, I did this funny drawing of this kind of figure, and then I gave it some little legs and some Adidas shoes, and then it says, "I can't really leave the ashtray." I feel like it's become my dwelling, my cell, my place of comfort. And that's funny because I think we've been talking a lot about this, how a place that could be so discomforting can also be a total place of comfort, how we find like comfort in solitude. And whenever you've been, I think not you, but like humans, we, you, me, everybody, whenever we've been forced into a solitude, I don't know, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I feel like I've really mastered that solitude, or that's what I'm always trying to master. And once I'm in that space and I can cope with that solitude, that's when the good things really happen.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of a place of comfort in that object for me, even though it's like an ashtray.
Well, which piece that you've created do you think has got the biggest emotional connection?
Probably that ashtray that I made in my adult pottery class that doesn't even I mean, it does look like my work, but the colors are different. The glazing is different. You know, I was experimenting with the glaze that you paint on, you know, and it's just got a very different articulation. Yeah, I was definitely limited by my knowledge at that point. I think that achievements are really strange. I always feel whatever I've done recently is somehow the most important thing as well.
And rightly so.
I've actually managed it. It's like, oh my God, I've managed it. So I made a public sculpture on a temple in the artist's garden, in the roof garden, and there was a missing balustrade, and I basically just recreated the balustrade and I sort of put it in, but I put it in figuratively, but I glazed it in a way that it looked like the old moldy London stone. So you could see it, you can't see it. And it's those kind of difficult things that I really enjoy, you know, afterwards. But I think I've got an emotional connection to most of my work. And if I don't, I smash it. I just get rid of it. If I know that it's not good enough, or it's not going to go anywhere, or it just didn't teach me anything, or I get rid of it.
If it's not emitting an energy, then why should it be there? I totally understand that. Well, I'd like to talk about the exhibition you're in at the moment, the group exhibition in Giant Gallery in Bournemouth. But just before I do, as a precursor to that, if you could be in an exhibition with any 5 artists, past or present, what would your ideal group show be?
Oh my word, that's really difficult, because on the one hand, I think I've actually done it. I mean, I'm in it now. I mean, I'm just going to go with the reality of what I'm in, because for this, that's such a good question. But then I'm thinking, wow, I don't want to be in an exhibition with them because I'm going to be shown up. And then it's like, oh no, I am actually in an exhibition with them. Circling your question, I'm currently in an exhibition with, is it 18? Yeah, 9 pairs of artists.
Wow.
And I mean, I got paired with a Louise Bourgeois, and that was terrifying. Although I did kind of like push for that, but not because I feel my work is like Louise Bourgeois's necessarily. It's more that my work is like hers from the point of view, she was in lifelong psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
And her work is all about psychoanalysis, you know, her relationship to that moment. And actually, she hated clay. She famously had a love-hate relationship with it. And she described that the essential quality of ceramics was breakability, which was something she refused. Yet she was a famous smasher. If you watch films about her, she's always smashing pots, smashing terracotta. And her father apparently had this bust of Marie Louise, somebody, in his office, and she wanted to run in and smash it.
Brilliant.
You know, so it's that kind of tension that I worked on to make this show, where I knew I was going to be paired with her. And I made this film of me smashing objects. And then what I did with the smashed clay objects was I made them into ceramics, wall-based ceramics. And I called them the essentials, after directly quoting Louise, you know, her opinion that the essential quality of ceramic is its breakability. Yeah, I mean, I think I've done it. I think.
And how good did you feel when you got the go-ahead that you was being paired with a giant like that?
Amazing, because it meant that somebody had to believe in me enough to lend me a Louise Bourgeois. So Marcel Joseph and Becca Pelli-Fry are the 2 curators, and they're both wonderful, but Marcel Joseph is such a generous person. And so along with Richard Saltoun Gallery, actually, they lent one of the Louise Bourgeois, the cross-eyed woman, which was apparently something Louise Bourgeois liked to do. She liked to cross her eyes for a laugh at her assistant, Jerry. And another collector called Kathy Wills lent the most amazing watercolor. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about, isn't it? It's like the generosity of others to make culture.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't have put myself in this exhibition, in the sense I couldn't have gone out and bought a Louise Bourgeois. I don't know how much they cost, but it's got to be at least 20,000 smackaroonies, and that's not going to happen. So it's that kind of relationship that is really surprising, but yeah, it's coming from people who are really invested in art in a way that they want to continue to make culture. And also, have you been to Giant Space in Bournemouth?
I haven't.
I think you'd love it.
I definitely would love it, because I know, well, I know Stuart anyway.
So Giant is a bonkers, right? So you've got Bournemouth, and like any seaside town, it's got its pros, it's got its cons, you know, and you can see there's a lot of regeneration, but there is no contemporary art.
Nothing.
And then you get to this, what Stuart's done is there's this Bobby's Building. Bobby's Building is kind of like Phoenix, it's or Harrods of Bournemouth.
Yeah.
Then you've got this Edwardian, very grand seaside department store, red brick, beautiful. Like you go and there's perfume and all that stuff. But then you catch this lift and you come to the top, and it's a total white cube. And it's full of people like Rosie Gibbons, the amazing performance artist,
Brilliant.
photocopied her bottom on a photocopier during her performance. You know, so you've got this mad contrast of happenings going on. And like, yeah, I mean, I really admire Stuart for this. He's definitely bringing a very different approach to making culture right in the heart of Bournemouth. And so the opening was incredible, because they've got a really well-known art school, and there were all these artists from the art school, and people literally had put it in their diaries. It was such a big opening, and Hector and I, we couldn't be bothered to take the stairs, so we took the lift, and we didn't realise that there'd be a queue round the stairs. We thought we'd just turn up, and we were really early. Maybe no one would be there. Anyway, so we get out the lift, and by getting out the lift, we dodged the queue, and all these people turned around and gave us really dirty looks.
Superb.
Yeah, but it's a really incredible space, and I think that the Body Poetics show is a really ambitious show that you know, the space merits, really.
So you've said that it's 9 pairs of female artists, is that correct?
Yeah, all female artists, because Marcel Joseph has a very feminist policy of collecting female art, and she has a curatorial movement that she calls girl power. That's it. She has a girl power collecting policy, which is nice. Yeah.
And how long's it on from until?
It's just started, and it's on until the 6th of May. So anyone going to the amazing Oceanarium in Bournemouth should also pop into Bobby's Building for free and go and see it. I mean, it's got like Louise Bourgeois, Helen Chadwick, Judy Chicago, Guerrilla Girls, Senga Ngudi, Nikki DeZonfal, Carolee Schneeman, Penny Slinger, Kiki Smith, all paired with a contemporary artist.
Brilliant.
It's pretty
How
big.
cool is that?
Yeah, really cool.
Well, if a person was to go up in that lift in Bobby's
by accident
and come out into Body Poetics,
yeah,
what do you think they would make of that exhibition?
It would really depend. That's a good question, but again, it's all relative, isn't it? It would depend on the person. And I did love watching Rosie Gibbons's performance, because I could see people that were horrified, and at the same time there were people that were just in love. You know, some people really couldn't handle it, not because of her, but because of them and their own sensibilities, their own reaction. And there's also a huge Tai Shani sculpture, which is a massive pair of bright pink breasts with then, like, you know, a faceless kind of faceless kind of form attached, and it's not really what you expect to see in a shopping centre.
And would they be
Although
shocked?
it is clearly an art gallery. I mean, it's made it's defined its space. It's
Yeah.
got, it's above. It's got this. It's kind of like a Tokyo or a Chinese experience, like the gallery in the shopping centre. But I don't think that's very British, is it?
No.
This white cube.
Yeah. I was talking to someone just last week who said that in Korea, their gallery spaces are in shopping centres.
Yeah,
And I wasn't aware of that. China as well,
yeah. In the mall. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went on a residency to China, actually. I went to Chengdu, which is known as the livable city. It's only got several million people in it, and 3 Louis Vuittons or whatever they've got. And it was just brilliant. Yeah. But we went out into these mountains and we did a show in a newly constructed shopping mall, which was all marble. And what was really interesting, I don't know how this came about, but it was like some of the most well-known Chinese artists paired with British artists, and they had security guards. They wouldn't let the locals in.
Wow.
And apparently in China, they put all these exhibitions up in shopping malls, but then they are not public. So they're really tightly controlled, because in China, they really do see contemporary art as having the ability to be the devil.
Yeah.
It was really odd. It was really odd. It was something else. It was something else.
But Stuart Semple isn't doing that in the Giant Gallery, though, right?
No. You are free to walk in. And I must say, Stuart knows how to throw a party. I want to meet this Stuart. I mean, not that I partook, but the booze was flowing, I tell you. Brilliant. I mean, he must have such a good reputation in film.
It's beautiful that the artists are paired. Was everyone given an artist to work with?
Yeah, I mean, lots of the artists are dead. So, yes, but the curators chose who the contemporary artists which are going to work with. And I think that that's a really nice way of working, because it brings sort of like contemporary artists into the canon, doesn't it? I mean, the history of art, I mean, there are many histories of art. There are so many different histories of art, but I think artists do spend a lot of time talking to dead people.
Definitely.
And yeah, it's like, or imaginary people, and this is really funny. This I've been thinking a lot about this recently. It's like, and it was what you were saying before about glass ceilings and ladders. And I think it's that entitlement. Who do you feel that you can be aligned to? Who do you feel that you can talk to? You often hear or you would often hear men, like great painters, talking about themselves in the same kind of sentence as Picasso. I mean, imagine if I started doing that. Well, my work's really like Picasso, because, I mean, you get laughed out of town. But at what point as an artist do you allow yourself to say, oh, actually, I really got this deep sympathy and empathy with the work of, and I feel it's really affected my work. And I think Louise Bourgeois is somebody that has touched on the lives of so many contemporary artists, so many. And so it was a real privilege to be anywhere near her, in a public context.
Yeah. But have you had that moment yet when you go to yourself, I'm paired with a giant?
It's an unfair pairing for her.
But have you had that moment?
I don't know. She was really generous, Louise Bourgeois, towards the end of her life. Generous in a clever way. Towards the end of her life, when she was very, very frail, she would do Sunday salons. So she would invite young artists to talk to, because I think there comes a tipping point, doesn't there? With people with really long careers, they love to be around younger people. So, for example, my son's got a girlfriend who's at art college. I'm totally fascinated. What are you doing? What are you using? How are you making it?
Oh,
what are you
Mom.
thinking? It's that type of thing, because I mean, I don't know. I do worry that Louise Bourgeois might haunt me if she doesn't like the work. But I tried my very best to respect, her kind of, her life work, really. Yeah. I mean, there's no comparison.
No, but you're not there to be compared to her. Who can be compared to her, really? You're working together to highlight each other's work. That's what you're doing.
But it's all a work in progress, isn't it? And there are some artists that are just so significant, and it would be crazy to make artwork and never ever consider them at some point.
Of course.
Like there are just some groundbreaking works that, you know, so for example, if you were going to work with tents, you would automatically think Tracy Emin. There's just no way around.
But that doesn't mean that no one else can use a tent.
No, exactly. Of course not. Because like, you know, her bed, she was referencing Rauschenberg and Johns. And that's the thing about gaining in confidence and really being signed up to the Church of Art. You can all sing the same song, but you're just going to sing it differently.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a congregation. And then there are sliding scales of success with that or not. But, you know, I've come to the point in my life where I understand I'm going to make art come what may. It's something I need to do. It's a compulsive disorder. So, or necessity, depending on how you see it. I think it's fine to be a fan, and I think it's fine to approach other people's work with a huge amount of respect and adoration.
I totally agree.
You know, just a shame I don't get to keep one of those Louise Bourgeois. It's going to be I'll tell you something, it's going to be the only time that I'm going to have my work with a video camera for surveillance. That's the first thing I saw. I saw like this, you know, like surveillance camera.
Yeah.
Ooh, I really have made it.
I am so important.
Yeah, I know. That was the signifier. The security camera. Oh my God.
And what do you think you'd like to do, Holly, if you wasn't an artist?
Be a diamond dealer? That's really bad, isn't it? That is really bad. I mean, that's ethically awful. I'd never run a pub for obvious reasons. I don't know. I really don't know. And
the final question. Where would anyone see what you're doing, be it website, social media?
I'm on Instagram, pathetically, and I have a website which I like to update with my favourite shows. So you can find me under hollystevenson.co.uk.
Okay.
And what am I doing at the minute? Oh, I've got all sorts of things going on. I'm in Body Poetics at Giant in Bournemouth. I've got a show opening in Rome at Richard Saltoun next week.
Nice.
Decentering ceramics. And I'm also in a show in West Kensington in what was the Queen's old Jaguar car showroom.
Okay.
It looks like a scene that, it's a very interesting space. And that's with Aniline Space.
Okay. So you got it all going on.
Yeah, I've got lots of nice things going on. And then I've got a show coming up at the end of the year, solo show with Pi Artworks, which I hope you'll come along to.
Where's that?
In East Castle Street in town.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
nice.
So I'll be sure to invite you.
Holly, anyway, sorry.
See you soon.
Right. Thank you very much.
You take good care.
Ta-da.
Bye.
Well, hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ministry of Arts podcast. So we wasn't dictated to by advertisers, we decided from the offset to go ad-free, which means obviously we had to self-fund. So we set up the Ministry of Arts Patreon page. And without that support, we would not be able to produce this podcast. So if you like what you hear and you're able to support the podcast, just go over to the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile. You'll find a Linktree drop-down box, which will direct you straight to our Patreon page. And for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help keep us growing week by week. But if you're not able to do that, that's fine, because this content is free for everyone. But leaving a review on whichever platform you listen to your podcast, that really does help us get noticed and anyone else looking for an art podcast. Or even giving us a positive shout out on your social media. Everything is appreciated. But either way, thanks for listening, and until next week, ta-da.